and thank you for joining me for today's Lake Take. Do you remember the old V8 juice commercials? You know, the ones where it was either a man or a woman who would be feeling a little out of balance, and then they would make their way through their day in the commercial leaning awkwardly sideways. That is, until they finally had their gulp of V8, and then they would rebalance and start walking upright. Looking back at them now, I admit they're pretty corny, but it also makes me think of the effect we feel when we deprive ourselves of God's Word and the things He designed for us to utilize our lives for. We too often replace those things that God created with short-term alternatives that are quickly rendered useless once the newness of them wears off. Like Apollos in 1 Corinthians 16:12, we find ways to put things off and then say to ourselves, I'll get to that later. But what we easily lose sight of is that time is precious and it seems to move a whole lot quicker the older we get. And speaking of time, it seems like a lack of it is often the excuse we use to put off doing more good things, spending more time in God's Word, and doing the things that will lead us to a greater place in our walk with God. And as I'm sure you know, the lack of time isn't really the issue. We could do many more things if we shifted our priorities and focused on the gifts and blessings that God has already given us. Finding joy in the wrong places while blaming it on the lack of time often leads to us feeling burnt out or losing our passion. The reality is, those things were never meant to sustain us, so it only makes sense that by pursuing them, we often are left feeling out of balance. I encourage you to stop and reflect on what might be causing you to put off spending more time in God's Word or doing the things He might be asking of you. Out of that reflection, I hope you'll be able to refocus, reshift, and ultimately rebalance.